KFI AM 640. You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly. On demand on the iHeartRadio app. Now, on Gary and Shannon, it's time for SwampWatch.
I'm a politician, which means I'm a cheat and a liar. And when I'm not kissing babies, I'm stealing their lollipops.
Here we go.
The real problem is that our leaders are dumb.
The other side never quits.
Dumb.
What are you doing in my swamp?
I'm not going anywhere.
So dumb.
That is how you drain the swamp.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been, you know?
Americans have always been gullible.
Act presidential.
But they're not stupid.
A political blunder is when a politician actually tells the truth.
Whether people voted for you or not,
SwampWatch.
They're all counting on you.
SwampWatch today brought to you by the Good Feet store. Are you living with foot pain? Have you been diagnosed with plantar fasciitis? Visit the Good Feet store and learn how you can find relief without shots, surgeries, or medications.
I got to ask you a question. How well do you know your civics? How well do you know how your own country works? You know, three-ring circus, three branches of government, that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of times we get mad about stuff because we don't know how things actually work. Donald Trump is our president. He was elected by more people, as in the popular vote, and he amassed more electoral college votes. He is the president. And to the victor go the spoils. And although many people may not agree with his legislative agenda, he has the right to enact it. Now, there are ways in which you can push back against that. In the legal sense, you can offer legal challenges. You can try to force it up the court system, the appellate courts and appeals court, and then it goes to the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court rules. And after that, it's done. And one of those examples is having to do with firing federal workers. There was a challenge to what DOJ was doing, whether they could, the Trump administration, legally fire federal workers. And that's separate and distinct from whether they had the autonomy and the power to move different budget items around. In other words, take federal funding. Just talking about firing federal workers. And for weeks now, we've waited on the Supreme Court to make a decision whether the Trump administration had the power, the legal right to fire federal workers. SCOTUS said, yes, the president has that power, and the Trump administration is going to move ahead with these mass layoffs. This is what I would say. And this goes back to what I said earlier about the federal government versus state and local governments. I look at the federal government as the insurance policy. The reason why we have the FDA is it's an insurance policy to make sure that bad actors aren't messing with our food, for example. The reason why we had the EPA, and I say had as in past tense because it's been basically dismantled, is to make sure that we're not doing things to environment, which long-term could really, really be bad for us. Be bad for us individually, be bad for us collectively and as a community. The reason why we have these federal agencies, because it's not realistic to have states monitor, quote unquote, the environment, the food, and so forth. That's why you had these federal agencies. The Trump administration has come from the standpoint that there's too much bloat. We don't need to have these agencies. We don't need to have the Department of Education. I personally disagree with that. I'm really big on education. But the Trump administration has taken the stand that there is too much bloat and we don't need this size of federal government. And so, pursuant to the election, and so that we are in a democracy. Well, let me stop right there. Yes, I know we're in a constitutional republic, but constitutional republic is a form of democracy. It's a representative democracy. It's shorthand, okay? So you can use either interchangeably. It's not a true democracy is one person, one vote, and so forth. But a constitutional republic is a form of democracy. We use democracy as a shorthand. I don't need you to correct me. Can't stand that. Learn your civics. But my point is, since Donald Trump won and became president, these are some of the steps that he is taking as president, and they're moving ahead with these mass layoffs. Going back to my analogy of how the federal government, I believe, is an insurance policy, we won't see the direct and indirect effect of these mass layoffs until down the road. We talked earlier about how FEMA has a role and to what extent a role it should play in the management of disasters when states themselves are unable to handle the size of them. If you think that Mississippi can handle a hurricane disaster in the same way that maybe Texas could, you're deluding yourself. There is a role for the federal government to play, but we won't see the true effects of a diminished or an eradicated FEMA in the short term, most likely. We would see it in the long term when we have a mass casualty event or some sort of disaster of Mother Nature and thousands of people have been impacted. And, like for example, what's going on in North Carolina right now and how they're trying to rebuild and have been petitioning the federal government. Alabama's been petitioning the federal government for more aid in light of the tornadoes. This is something that could impact states and communities for years. We think about what happened with Hurricane Katrina in the city of New Orleans. And I visited New Orleans, and it took New Orleans at least 10 years with the help of FEMA, the federal government, to get back to some sense of normality. But we won't know the importance of FEMA until down the road. We won't know until we have an issue which impacts tens of thousands of people. We won't know. And so in the short term, the Trump administration, they will be firing people left and right, thousands and thousands of people. And there's an argument to be made, a good argument as far as whether all these federal employees are necessary. That is a good argument. There is an argument to be made about our budgeting, whether we are spending the money in the right way, on the right things, on the right people at the right time, and under the right circumstances. Those are legitimate arguments. But there's also a legitimate argument as to whether this wholesale slashing of departments and agencies without real analysis of their impact and import has unintended consequences down the road. Again, I like the insurance analogy because I remember, and if you're over the age of 40, you remember as well. Elmer, I think you're under the age of 40, so he may not be there yet. But I remember when I was 21, 22 years old, I never got sick. I was in perfect health. I was working out every day. The whole idea of carrying health insurance is like, you want me to pay for health insurance when I'm healthy all the time? I don't need health insurance. And this is actually before they even mandated car insurance. I said, I don't need car insurance. You know how much money I could save? Waste, fraud, and abuse. You know how much money I could save if I didn't pay for health insurance? If I didn't pay for car insurance? My car is just fine. I'm a good driver. I'm not going to get any accidents, and I'm not going to get sick. I don't need long-term disability on my work insurance. I don't need any of that. And then you get a little older, and then you start understanding how and why you need it there just in case. You need it there for actual disasters or emergencies. And you get older and you understand the long-term implications of not having health insurance, not having car insurance, whether you can afford it or not. But not having it can make a disaster even worse. And this is what I think may happen here in America with all this wholesale cutting of agencies and employees for the sake of numerology, for the sake of budgets, for the sake of line items, saving money. Sometimes you can cut off an arm and a leg, and then you end up killing the body altogether. Gary and Shannon Show, I'm Mo Kelly here.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
And the second portion of SwampWatch, I want to talk about tariffs generally and specifically. We know our president is really focusing on using tariffs to, I'll say, realign our trade relationships all around the world. Originally, he had talked about some 90 trade deals in 90 days. Didn't quite make it there. He has the framework on 3 different trade deals and maybe one another in the pipeline, but for any trade deal to be consummated, it has to be passed by Congress, going back to civics, first and foremost. So saying we have a deal and even the announcement of a deal does not mean we actually have a deal until the deal is consummated via of Congress. And when you watch these things, when you listen to things, I always want to make sure that people know what they're listening to or what's being told to them. You can come to your own conclusion, but you should know what is factual and what is fiction. And as far as tariffs are concerned, I hope people know, like, let's say Elmer. I'm going to pick on Elmer for a second. And Elmer has his business, Elmer's Widgets. Elmer's Widgets is doing real well, and he sells widgets for maybe $1 each. And President Trump has said, we're putting a tariff on all widgets. But Elmer has to buy his widgets from China in this hypothetical. So for you, Elmer, you sell your widgets at $1 each. You buy, you sell them. You have to buy them for $1 each. Okay, you purchase each unit $1 each, and then the president says we're going to put a 25% tariff on your widgets, which means you, as Elmer's Widgets, have to pay the $1.25 for each widget wholesale cost.
No.
You, because that's how you get your widgets from China. That 25% is a cost that you have to incur. China's not paying it. China is saying, hey, Elmer, if you want these widgets, they're going to cost more because there's a tariff, which means the importer, you as the importer, you're bringing the widgets into the country. You have to pay for them. Now, you have a decision to make, Elmer. You can purchase those widgets at $1.25 and either eat it or pass it along to the consumer. That's up to you.
Oh, I see.
But China does not pay that tariff. China is only offering you the opportunity to purchase your goods from China. The whole point of a tariff is to make, or I should say, level a competitive playing field where, let's say, you have United States manufacturers, domestic manufacturers of widgets. Then you can say, okay, since it's more expensive to import your widgets, you may look for an American supplier of widgets. And let's say it costs maybe $1.15 to provide that same widget to you. And, USA Widgets is now a better option. But as far as paying the tariff, China doesn't pay it. Anyone who would then want to import those widgets pays the tariff. So when someone says China's going to pay the tariff or these other countries going to pay the tariff, that is actually not true. The importer pays the tariff, and the importer then has to make a decision whether the importer, Elmer's Widgets, is going to pass that on to me as a consumer who wants to buy widgets, or Elmer's Widgets can eat that and just still sell it at $1. That means you're losing money because you're paying more than what you're selling it for, whatever your margins were beforehand. You may even shrink your margins. Let's say you were selling that widget at $1.50. Originally, you're paying for it for $1 per unit and selling it for $1.50. Now you're paying $1.25 per unit. You can still sell it for $1.50. That would mean you're eating the cost, the price increase because of the tariff. Or you can say, no, I'm going to sell it for $1.75 and get my 25 cents back, 25 cents extra. And that is how we should look at these stories about tariffs. When the president says that a 50% tariff on copper imports is coming, and he threatens a 200% one on pharmaceuticals, that only matters relative to what the importer decides to do. He said at a cabinet meeting yesterday, quote, we're doing copper. And then he added that he believed the rate would be 50%. And we know that most imported cars and car parts are facing a 25% tariff. Imported steel and aluminum both face 50% tariffs. So importers, car companies, or any company which uses copper now has to make a decision. They can either purchase and import the copper or the other parts for cars at the increased price point, and then decide to pass that on to consumers like you and me, or they can find an American supplier to get their copper from. And depending on the raw goods and materials, we don't have that in America. But if you have the option, then you can look to an American supplier and buy from them. The thinking behind the tariff is if you put a high enough tariff, then people will have no choice but to buy American. That works in theory, provided you can buy American. Like, for example, if you have a smartphone, everybody has a smartphone, you might be listening on the iHeartRadio app. Those chips, those semiconductor chips, are all made in China and Taiwan. So that phone is most likely going to cost more no matter what. China's not paying for that. Taiwan is not paying for that. You, as the consumer, are most likely going to pay that unless Apple or Google decide to eat that tariff, because the smartphone semiconductor chips now cost more because of these tariffs. It's complicated, and at the same time, it's simple. The tariffs are going to be passed on to us most likely, and we're going to be paying more for the goods and services. But it does open up the door, the possibility in certain industries, depending on what it is, for us to instead buy American. But there are almost virtually no products which are completely constructed and manufactured here in America. You can go get a Ford, which is a quote-unquote American-made car, and that crosses the border many times. It has all sorts of parts which are made outside the country, which are brought into the country, which will have a tariff put on them, and it still makes the final product, the Ford automobile, which is quote-unquote an American company. That car is still going to cost more because its internal parts were made overseas, and they're not made here. They still cross the border from maybe Canada. And they go back and forth, and they're tariffed each time that they cross the border. So even though you may be buying American, not every part in it is made in America or is available to be purchased in America. This is another thing where it's going to take, I would say, months, maybe even years to see the full impact of this tariff war, if you will, and see whether it's good for our economy or not. If you're trying to make a decision right now, you're not really paying attention, because it's going to take some time for the markets to settle and decide whether we want to pay the prices that importers are passing along to us, or whether we're going to just not buy anything at all. So keep on watching. It's the Gary and Shannon Show. Mo Kelly here. KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app, and I love the opportunity, if I should be filling in for Gary and Shannon, to talk to people like Justin Worshim. Because not only do they sometimes forget how freaking funny you are.
Oh, that's very kind, Mo.
But you're a good dude, and we need to talk more just in general. So let's talk about parenting with Justin Worshim.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start today?
I think you and I are going to have a lot of mileage in these 80s tropes of parenting that are long gone. That they would be illegal today. Because when I first saw this, I didn't know you were filling in, and I like to find things that will sometimes trigger Gary. But when I found out you were here, I'm like, this is going to more than trigger Mo. Like, I think this excites you. Like,
it does, because I was a kid who was raised on the belt, and I'm a firm believer of physical discipline. Beat your kids before they grow up and break in my house. I'm serious.
I would rather. That's part of why it's so funny.
I'm not exaggerating. I get so much hate mail. I'm so serious. I would rather they learn strict physical discipline than smashing and grabbing.
Right.
It's real simple.
I wonder, that is interesting. I wonder what the over-under is on people who are incarcerated of, like, if they had physical discipline in their, like, I also like they call it corporal punishment, which I think is an interesting way to phrase it. I had
teachers wrap my knuckles with a ruler, in school. But I'm a firm believer, to be real serious and not take it away from you. Yeah. My father was very strict with me, and he was teaching me parameters, boundaries, that the world, if it were to teach me later, I would end up in jail or dead. He was saying that I need to teach you this. If you do this and go too far and you get your ass whipped by me, it's because I'd rather it come from me than the prison or the morgue or both.
Yep. Yeah. Well, here, let's go down these just to give you some more rant stuff. Is letting kids ride in the front seat. Just in general, I was always so bad. I told you before we came back that my son was maybe 5 months old. We were going on a road trip to Denver to take my son to go see
young children. You're saying?
Oh, he was very young. But I'm saying this is anybody. But I'm just giving the example as an extreme example. We were driving through a snowstorm. I was doing maybe 15 to 20 miles an hour. My son was 5 months old. He needed either a diaper change or to eat. And my wife was like, "You got to pull over so I could feed him or whatever." And I was like, "No." I go, "Just do it in the car. We're barely moving." She's like, "We can't do that. That's illegal." I'm like, "You and I didn't have car seats. We sat like I did a 3-day road trip to Texas where they just put like a spot where a suitcase would go in the trunk of a station wagon, and that is where I lived for 3 days."
I will do you one better.
I bet you will.
My father's car, it had a bench as a back seat
Yeah.
and a bench as a front seat. Didn't have bucket seats.
No.
I don't think it had a lap seat belt. It didn't have a shoulder seat belt.
It was swinging loose. Nobody wore it. Nobody. It was just
There was
an
no
object
seatbelt
to
law.
kill you while you're rolling in
That's
the car.
right. And they slammed on the brakes, and I bounced off the front bench seat.
The old like the old comedy
hold it,
bit.
put your arm across.
out. That was your parental seatbelt. Smoking around the kid. This was my entire childhood. To the point where my dad passed away, I took up smoking again just as a way of remembering it.
Both my parents smoked until they were 40, and my father's mother had come to live with us, my grandmother, and she smoked until the day she died. She would smoke in the car with the windows rolled up, and I'm the kid. She'd pick me up from school, and I'm thinking, wow, this is what it's like to smoke, because the whole car was filled with smoke. Talk about secondhand smoke. I should be dead of lung cancer by now.
A head turn while you're in kindergarten. This is one that I think is interesting, but because there's no official age in the law, but letting kids stay home alone at a very young age. Like I was in 3rd grade, probably 7, 8 years old when I was home alone after school for a while. How about you?
I got 2 words for you. Latchkey, kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you were home and could lock the door, you were good, because the instructions were don't open the door for anyone.
Right.
And don't turn on the stove.
But
that was
like
it.
Today's kids, I think they feel traumatized if they get left alone. I thought it was magical. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV. I could eat whatever I wanted. I never felt neglected at all by it.
What did you do for sick days? My parents went to work. I was home sick.
Yeah.
Or sick, air quotes.
Yeah.
You know, and many times I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. Now, today, they would look at that as like parental neglect.
Yeah.
Me, it was like, hey, cartoon.
This is great.
Game shows.
Right? It's a win. This one, this is where maybe I get too bubbly. Maybe you'll disagree with me, but leaving kids in the car while running errands, like going into the store, like that's pretty, especially in Southern California. That's not a good idea.
It's not a good idea then or now, but when they did it back in the day, we had vinyl seats, which were like,
oh yeah, just
vinyl.
burn.
I didn't say leather. I said vinyl. And those things, and the dashboard, it would start cracking over the years just from the heat. It was much more dangerous then than now.
Yeah. I didn't know this was a thing, but I just don't even remember having car seats. But it says no car seats after age 3. I don't ever remember there being a car seat. Like
I think you have car seats like up until like they're 12. Their feet got to be able to touch their, yeah.
Today they're almost like 13, 14. Like I took it out at 10. Like I just said, you're done. We're done here. This is fine.
I never sat in a car seat in my life.
No, me neither.
So I don't know when the law changed, but you know, I thought if they could sit in the seatbelt and the lap, the cross belt didn't cut their neck off, their circulation, they're good enough.
The biggest tragedy to kids today is letting them play outside all day without checking in. Remember when the street lights came in? That was the international sign you had to go home?
I had to check in every 2.5 hours.
Really? You had to go by the house?
Yes. Or I had to call in, you know, obviously from a land phone.
Yeah, go to somebody's house?
Yeah, I remember my mother called the police on me when I didn't check in after 5 hours. I rode my bike from Harbor City to Torrance, and I said, F it, I'm not going to check in. And then I was gone. I missed my check-in. It's almost like proof of life concept. I didn't call in, so they called LAPD on me and put in a missing persons report. So when I came home at 5 o'clock, true story, and all the kids in the neighborhood, they saw me. It's like, where you been? And I said, riding my bike. What the effing deal? What do you care? He said, don't go home. Don't go home.
That's not your home anymore. You're on a lam.
And I turned and hit the corner, and I saw LAPD in my driveway, and I speed up thinking like, what, did someone get shot? Did they rob the house? Was there a burglary? And I got home, and my mother's looking like, bring your black ass here.
This is what you love. Spanking in public. We already talked about that. You're a fan of that. This is one I get so much flack, even from my kid's pediatrician, letting kids drink soda all day. I never touched water as a kid. I don't know how we stayed alive.
My parents didn't allow me to drink
no soda for you.
And to their credit, I do not drink any soda now. So that was a good habit they instilled in me.
This I'll do this last one because I just love the way it's written. No sunscreen, helmets, or safety gear, just vibes. I like that they modernized it.
I lost a couple of baby teeth riding my bike.
Yeah.
And fell in the street, knocked my teeth out right in front of my house. My mother lost her mind. I remember kicking a bottle and cutting my foot open, didn't get stitches. Yeah, I drank water out of the hose, as they said. I did all those things, all those dangerous, stupid things. I played ding dong ditch. Toilet paper people's houses. They shoot you for that now.
Yeah.
But I can say I've lived.
Now they come to your door and they just spray you a silly string. That's the extent of the prank.
Oh, no. I wouldn't even do that now because it's dangerous. They shoot people through doors. Being very serious. I wouldn't. No.
It's crazy. But yeah, that's all the stuff from there. I think the big thing, the biggest thing that we're taking away from these young kids is that they don't have any awareness. I'm not saying I want kids to get hurt or I want them to be in dangerous situations, but when everything is a bubble, if you go to a pickup at a middle school or a high school, those kids just walk into a crosswalk and they don't even look. They're not even paying attention. They're not even on their phones. They're just looking at the ground.
Yeah, it's amazing. You just assume that this dumbass is going to stop.
Yeah.
We got to pick this up on the other side. I think we were born the same day, same place.
Yep.
Lived in the same house. Are you sure? You're not my brother, are you?
Oh, it'd be so great if I was. This would be a great day to find out, too. So much explanation would have to be done.
Look, Daddy, you got some explaining to do.
I would be so happy to be able to use the phrase brother from another mother.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
Mo Kelly in for Gary and Shannon just today. It'll be all right. You're talking parenting with Justin Worshim.
What's going on?
Oh, no.
Do you need a hug?
You get those messages like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Why are you here?
That is true about radio listeners specifically, I feel like. Any deviation from the pattern.
And it's my fault. It's like,
why
did you do this to me? They called me.
Yeah.
I promise you I would have been snoring right now. I didn't plan to be here.
I'm the night guy. I don't want to be here right
now. I'm just keeping the chair warm.
That's great.
But there's almost like a correlation here. We talk about parenting and kids, these expectations that kids have. They just expect things. They expect that you're going to pay for their lifestyle. And to some degree, at some ages, that's accurate. After a certain point, it's not accurate. And then they start taking liberties.
I heard an interesting stat that this generation of children is going to be the first generation that is less well off than their parents were financially.
And part of that is not their fault.
No.
Like, for example, when I moved out, and I was mouthing off to my mother. She kicked me out, and I deserved it. No point there. But I moved in with my friends into a 3-bedroom apartment. This is 92. Moved into a 3-bedroom apartment in Torrance. We all paid $400 each. So it's $1,200 for a 3-bedroom in 1992 in a good part of Torrance. That's at least $4,000 now.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's that's we've even talked about the idea of maybe leaving Southern California when my kids are done with high school, because they can't just get a regular job here in Southern California and get a house. There's no way they can afford it. I help so many parents who have to kick in at least $250,000, in some cases as much as $750,000, or even one case where a parent paid $1.3 million just paid for the house. Because there's no way that a kid could afford it.
You would appreciate this. My parents, my father's passed on, but they bought this house that they live in. My mother lives in now to this day. They've lived in more than 50 years. They bought it in Harbor City in 1975 for $54,000, a 4-bedroom house, 2-parent salary. They're both teachers, so moderate middle income, but they could buy a 4-bedroom house for $54,000 in 1975. Now, the house now is probably worth more than $1 million.
Oh,
it doesn't matter where you are, okay?
Definitely, yeah.
That time is never coming back, and I'm not going to blame people who were just born later in the timeline of history.
No, yeah. Because inflation hasn't caught up, wages haven't caught up with the inflation of those prices. Not at all. In fact, part of what the other segment I want to talk about was empty nests, and they talk about that more than half of kids that are 18 to 29 either live at home or are supported by their parents in some way financially, where in 1960 it was 25%.
We do the latter. In other words, you have to show the initiative, and we'll help you relative to the initiative you show. You got to make sure that you're at least gainfully employed. I want to know that you're working in the right direction, that you're paying for a modicum of your bills. Like you're paying for your car, we'll help you with your insurance. You're paying for rent, we'll help you with your rent. In other words, if you're trying to do the right thing, then my wife and I can see a way to help you. But if you're just sitting on your ass and saying like, hey, everything's so expensive out there.
Yeah.
You're leaving us no choice but to ignore you.
Yeah,
and you can't live here.
Like we talked about in the last segment, our possible mutual father, it seems. Right. My dad said to me at one point where I said I needed some help for some money. He's like, I've helped you before. It doesn't seem to work. So you're going to figure this one out on your own. Best thing he ever did for me. Like, best thing he ever did. Now, again, I'm not trying to imply that people need just to throw their kids out of the house, but there's a middle of the road. There's a middle of the road between like no help whatsoever, regardless of the circumstance. To me, that's not what family is for. And then covering everything with very little to no expectation on the kid. Like, how do you expect them to rise to that expectation if you don't have one?
This is something that I actually had to argue and fight with my wife over, because when I have blended family stepsons, but I had them as teenagers. And so I look at it through a different lens. And I was brought up in this way. My parents were firm in the idea of giving me a bill, giving me something that I was responsible for. In today's world, that translates to paying for their cell phone. So they have to show a level of responsibility to keep something which is important to them. And then by the time they're 19, 20, 21, they're hopefully a better manager of money and understand that with choices come consequences as far as how they spend their money, and maybe they're better prepared to handle multiple bills.
Yeah, because it's becoming a growing trend. They call it multi-generational housing, where kids are staying in. This was also, I did some research in it. This was common in other cultures, just not the Caucasian culture. Evidently, we want our kids the hell out of the house. But there's.
Let me tell you about black culture.
Okay.
These motherfuckers need to get out. I will help you. And my wife said it. She made it very clear. She said, you are above 18. I don't need a roommate. So you're going to either go to school or you're going to go.
I told my dad at one time, I don't know why, I was halfway through my senior year. I turned 18, and then the dynamic changed. We were always very close. He was like my best friend my entire life. Not in the friend way, like he was a dad, right? But still, like I love talking to him. I love hanging out with him. And it took me until I was like 21, like everybody, and I look back and I was like, hey, were you like an a-hole on purpose when I turned 18 because you wanted me to leave? And he said a great line. He goes, I didn't want you to be comfortable.
Yes. No, I said the exact thing to my wife. I said, they're too comfortable.
Yeah.
There's no reason to leave if you're paying for their food, their shelter, their clothing, their phone bill, their car note, their car insurance.
That's a great life if you could get it.
Who would want to leave that?
I would love a sugar mama.
Right. I looked at my wife. I said, you don't even do that for me. Why are we going to do that for these crumb snatchers? They don't even do dishes.
It's so true. It's so true.
Last word is yours, Justin.
Empty nesting is what we were trying to talk about. The point is, make sure you stay connected as a couple, because eventually all the kids leave and you don't want to be distracted. So if you got a youngest kid who's going to be leaving soon, start having some date nights, because a lot of people find themselves struggling when they're like, we don't have that buffer or distraction of kids, and it's just you and me again.
Oh, the best thing about being empty nesters, because all the sons have left, is I had to let them know, it's like, yes, you may know the code to walk in the house, digital locks and that kind of thing, but do not under any circumstances walk in this house unannounced, okay? Because I like to walk around bucket ass naked. So if you want to go against that, that's on you. That's on you. What you see is what you see. You don't live here anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
My friend had to live with her in-laws because her house was getting worked on. And one day they came home and her mom and dad were on the couch having a good old time. And she's like, oh. And her husband was like, that's great. I'm so happy for them. Like at their age, especially. And now every time she would come home, she'd shake her keys and keep her like, we're here.
You learned your lesson, didn't you? Justin, it's always good to see you.
Better see you, man. Thank you.
Gary and Shannon Show, Mo Kelly here. KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app.
You've been listening to Later with Mo Kelly. You can always hear us live on KFI AM 640, 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. every Monday through Friday, and anytime on demand on the iHeartRadio app.